Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Yanchuleff, Worldwide Tech Lead for Kiro. Today's episode's going to be all about Kiro, our new Agentic IDE that stands to change the way developers do their day-to-day work. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am the worldwide tech lead for Kiro most recently, but prior to that, I was the specialist solutions architect for the next generation developer experience at AWS. And so I have the opportunity to work with customers that are using all of the different sort of next generation developer tools that we have here at the company, including QDeveloper, AWS Transform, and now Kiro. And looking at different ways in which they're solving problems using generative AI.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about Kiro.
Absolutely. It has been hugely successful since it's launched. It is now approaching the most successful service launch in the history of the company. And people are really excited about one major feature, which is the spec-driven development capability. And we're seeing people really find excitement in that because it is solving a number of different problems, specifically around working with applications that already exist. So when we're talking about companies that want to use tools, oftentimes it's great if you're starting from scratch. But when we're starting with existing code bases, these tools struggle because there's a lot of context there that they don't have access to. And so they can't take advantage of the capabilities when there's existing code. And so with Kiro's steering capabilities and with its spec-driven development capabilities, it solves that problem. And it frees up a really critical piece of the LLM puzzle, which is the context window. Context window is kind of like the memory of the onboard LLM. And when we think about computers and the way in which memory has expanded over the last couple of decades, a similar pattern is repeating itself with LLMs. And so anything we can do to keep those LLMs context window free to be able to work on the task at hand is really critical for a successful deliverable. The spec-driven development capabilities and the steering window in Kiro allow us to separate all of that information out and leave that context window free to be able to do the work.
You touched on a really interesting element of Kiro that I, from my own personal experience working with it since it launched in preview, is it's very exciting how there's two different modes, right? You have vibe coding mode, which we've seen in similar tools in the past, but the spec-driven mode, could you tell me a little bit more about how that differentiates from what we've seen in the past with vibe coding?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I like to tell people is when you are working with a development team and you have a project that you want to work on, we rarely bring a development team into a room, give them 3 sentences of instruction, and then let them start banging on a keyboard and expect to get good results out of the other side. That typically leads to chaos, and for good reason. Everybody has different ideas about how things should be done. Everybody has different approaches to the problem, and everybody has different speeds at which they work. And so this leads to a very chaotic result. You might get to a solution, but it may not work well with all of the different pieces, and it may not be complete in line with what you had in mind, given the 3 sentences that you gave it. And so what Kiro is doing here is it's differentiating that approach with spec-driven development. We can think of vibe coding like that idea of bringing the team of engineers in and giving them 3 sentences. So spec development gives you the idea of we're going to first figure out what we're going to build. What are the requirements? What are the user stories? What's the acceptance criteria? And we're going to collaborate on that with our requirements writers, with our designers, with our developers. And then when we're happy with that, we're going to move on and we're going to build a design spec. How are we going to build it? What are we going to build it with? What are we going to do to test it? How are we going to implement it? And once again, we're going to collaborate with our project architects, with our developers, with the rest of our team. And then when we're happy with that, we're going to move on and we're going to build a project plan, a set of implementation tasks that need to be accomplished to map out that design spec and those requirements. Those 3 documents map out the spec that Kiro is creating. So when I put it into spec-driven development mode, what it's doing there is it's creating those 3 documents before it ever writes any lines of code. And then once I have that, then I can move it into vibe mode, or I can simply go to the implementation tasks and start implementing them directly. But now I'm building with a very clear set of instructions, a very clear-cut plan, and a very clearly defined set of tools that I'm going to use. And so even if I spread this out across a team of developers, I can be pretty confident that when we're done, all those pieces are going to fit together and they're going to match what I had in mind when I put that prompt in the first place.
Brilliant. I also want to leverage, or at least touch on the topic of MCP support as well for Kiro. What does that look like as of today?
Yeah, Model Context Protocol has been really popular in the LLM space. I think because it expands the landscape of what the LLM can do. In much the same way that APIs expanded the landscape for web browsers, LLMs now have the benefit of working with any third-party tool that's out there, whether that's a custom tool that I have in-house, and Amazon has certainly built a number of those for our own internal tools that our developers are using, but also connecting with third-party libraries and third-party applications, things like Jira and Confluence, that are widely used in the industry. And so with MCP support now in Kiro, what I can do is something like ask Kiro to go and get a spec, not from a prompt that I just produced, but from a user story that's already created in my application. So my requirements writers don't need to change their workflow. They can continue to work in Jira or wherever they want to store that. And then with an MCP tool, my developers now can gain that information, create a spec, update that spec, keep it in sync with Jira, and still allow them to actually take advantage of all of those capabilities that we just talked about inside of the Kiro application itself. So MCP is really powerful in that it opens up the door for the LLM to work with so many different other tools that are out there.
What's something that really excites you about Kiro?
Yeah, I think it's really the two things that are there. Before Kiro even launched, we started pivoting to talking to customers who are using QDeveloper about something we call design-driven development, which is essentially this idea, again, of doing the design work, doing the specifications ahead of time, and freeing up that context window and figuring out what is it that I'm building. Because when I put a prompt in and I send it through and I rely on the LLM to make all the decisions for me, it becomes this really mysterious black box. I don't know what's happening there. It's making decisions, and what ends up happening on the other side is that I end up going, well, actually, that's not what I wanted. Actually, I wanted this other thing. Actually, I wanted you to use this approach. Actually, I wanted you to test it this way. And so there's all this back and forth that happens. And you can do the same thing that Kiro does with QDeveloper today, but it's very manual. And so there's all these complex prompts that I have to create to build a requirements document and then to build a design document. And Kiro just integrates all of that into one really simple workflow. I just put it into spec mode. I type my same lazy 3-sentence prompt in, and now I get a fully fleshed out kind of set of requirements, a set of acceptance criteria, design specs, implementation tasks. All of that is there, and I still get to be lazy, which is the best part about it. And so I can put in that basic information, and nothing else out there really does it that way. And I think that's why we've seen such a huge excitement around the tool in the marketplace. Social media has been really excited about it. Customers that have participated in our private beta have said tremendous amount of things about spec-driven development, more than anything else in the tool. I think it's solving a really important problem that customers have had, and we've been able to hit the nail on the head with a solution here for them.
That's so exciting to hear. And I think just to really highlight how important spec-driven development is, I think if you look at maybe prior options for vibe coding, right? Like I think the task of providing a 3-sentence prompt, like you said, and then building an entire production-ready application from that, it's like asking a human being through a 3-sentence prompt, hey, go build a production-ready app. And the real difference that I'm seeing with spec-driven development is it's able to break it down into such manageable tasks in such a formatted and controllable way that you can really get there so much faster now.
Yeah, I think speed is a really important piece there, but I like what you said about the creativity of building a production-ready app. I think a good way to talk about or think about LLMs is to treat them like junior developers. And so if you're going to hire a summer intern or bring in a junior developer and you're going to tell them, here's 3 sentences, go build this, no one in their right mind would do that. You'd get crazy results out the other side of it. And that's, in reality, what we've been trying to do with LLMs. We've been trying to treat them like junior developers, give them the laziest prompt in the world, and then hope that we get a production-grade application out the other side. And it's disappointing when it doesn't work. And the time that it takes to fix all of that and to correct the mistakes and to adjust the expectations and all of that, it adds up. On its face, it sounds like a huge time savings. I give it this prompt, it goes and does the work. That's amazing. But what you don't count is all of the extra back and forth that happens on the back side of that. And so when you hear spec-driven development, at first it can sound like, oh, you're adding an extra step to this process. Now I have to design these, now I have to create these design documents, and then I can go do the implementation. This is going to take longer. But in reality, what you're doing is you're chopping out all of that back and forth that's happening on the backside of the implementation by addressing all of those concerns up front in a way that's easy to read, it's understandable, and it still allows me to use those really simple prompts to get started.
I'm curious if there's any use cases that you've personally used with Kiro where maybe something surprised you, like you didn't realize it could do a certain thing or achieve a certain use case, and it really did impress you with its capability. Do you have any examples you could share?
Yeah, actually, I was working on a demo. The demo that we have, I'll show you in a little bit. We're trying to build out an application that showcases both the greenfield capabilities of being able to build an application from scratch, and also being able to show how to work with an application that already exists. And so when you're starting to work with an application that already exists, you have to have an application that already exists. And so I was going to use QCLI to actually build an application that I could use as my model for existing applications. But I tried to use Kiro instead. And so I laid it out and I put in, I need this API. I built an event management application. So Kiro Events is what I called it. And it allows me to create events and invite people to my events and track who's going to attend and who's going to decline and so on and so forth. And so I used Kiro and I started out with a blank sheet of paper and I put in a really basic prompt and I said, I just want an event API that is written in Python. And that was all I gave it. And it went in and it fleshed out all of those different details. And it asked me follow-up questions. And it said, what about this? And do you need this extra detail? Because you're missing this piece. And so as I worked through that, I got a really detailed requirements document. And I was able to read through that. And it took my really basic prompt and it created this really cool application. And so I used all of that then to build the whole solution. And what impressed me the most about it was the requirements were cool. It filled in a lot of gaps there. But what was impressive was in the task list. It added a whole level of infrastructure there around testing and integration testing and unit testing and deployment details that I hadn't even thought of, let alone asked for. And so by the time I got through all of my implementation tasks, not only had I built the application, but I had working unit tests, I had working integration tests, I had an MCP server using Playwright that could go in and do a browser testing with a sample client that it had made to be able to test the API. And so just the level of detail that it came up with to do all of this additional work, frankly, stuff that I don't particularly enjoy doing. Testing is not my forte, nor is documentation. And so documentation and testing and those types of things that I typically don't think of until way after the fact, Kiro had already thought through that, put all of those pieces in, and allowed me to implement them. And that was a huge time saver because one of the challenges with LLMs, at least that I've run into, is that it builds all this code, but then I've got to go read the code and I've got to figure out, is this code any good? Does this actually work? Does this pass the sniff test? But now that there's working unit tests, now that there's working integration tests, I feel a lot more confident in what it's produced because I know that it works. And so that really impressed me that it went that extra step and really put all of those pieces in place for me without me having to ask. And that was the part that really saved me a huge amount of time.
And I really want to highlight the point you brought up there too, in terms of being able to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes for a developer to tackle a lot of those tasks that they don't necessarily want to spend the majority of their time doing, right? Again, undifferentiated heavy lifting that we can eliminate from their workflow for the most part. And I think a really good example, right? Like you mentioned documentation. I don't think any developer wakes up in the morning and they're like, I get to write a README file today for this entire repo?
Absolutely.
Yes. Like that's, I don't think ever happened. Maybe there's someone who really loves writing documentation out there.
Markdown is my life.
Right. Exactly. Like there's a markdown warrior out there, right? I don't want to, come after them, but I think it's a really huge time save. And I think it's going to make the lives of developers so much easier.
Yeah.
Its capability too.
And Kiro, let's not forget Kiro has the same agentic AI capabilities that Q does. So not only is it writing the unit tests, but it's also running the unit tests. It's evaluating the results and it's iterating on that process until the unit tests pass. And so there's again, I can kind of set it and forget it almost and let it go off and run and iterate while I go work on something else or grab a cup of coffee or eat lunch. And it's off doing the stuff that I do not particularly enjoy doing. If you've seen the Q developer slides or read any of the Q developer blog posts, you know that there's a statistic that we use often with Q, that developers on average spend less than 1 hour a day working on actual development tasks. They spend the rest of their time doing all this other stuff that they don't particularly enjoy. So again, anything that we can do to solve that other 7 hours worth of stuff, make that easier, make it faster, or take it off the developer's plate altogether is a huge win in the overall efficiency that developer then has, and the overall quality of life, to be so bold about how they enjoy their job and the things that they get to work on. We have an internal Slack channel here at the company that tracks all the different internal developers that are using the tool and playing around with it, and the number of posts in there of people who are reporting, hey, I just stepped out on a lunch break and I built this whole application that saves me this huge thing that I had to work on during my lunch break. And now it's up there and it's running, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I was able to do it all in the span of like an hour or 2 hours. And I didn't even know that was possible. We have also had a number of people come to us who have admitted it, that I wasn't a coder. Like I know what I wanted. I was able to flesh that out in a spec, let Kiro figure out all the details there of how I was going to implement it. And then all I had to do was go and click the buttons, and Kiro built it for me. And now I have this tool that is a huge time saver for me. And so the ability to empower people who are not naturally developers or who don't have that background knowledge and walk them through that process is a huge game changer for what they're able to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think being able to approach it from that angle too, what would you say is the learning curve for Kiro, for someone who might be new to development but very interested in leveraging all of these new AI-powered agentic features?
Yeah, somebody asked me the other day if we were going to write a detailed user manual for Kiro. And it was an interesting question, because the response that I felt like was the right answer there was, if we have to write a detailed user manual for this tool, we've done something horribly wrong. And so the cool thing about the tool is that once you install it and you load it up and you log in, you're presented right there with the chat. You can either drop into vibe mode or you can drop into spec mode. And if you drop into spec mode, you just type in your idea, whatever that is, and it walks you through the process step by step. It lays out all the requirements, and it even asks you, once it finishes the requirements, hey, go take a look at these. Make sure they're good. Make any adjustments that you need to make before we hit the continue button. And so it kind of walks the developer through, or even the user if they're not naturally a developer. Now, we've had conversations with customers about bringing their requirements writers into the fold, or their product designers into the fold, and letting them to start use tools like Kiro, because even though they're not developers naturally, they can start doing proof of concepts, they can start iterating on their ideas and validating whether their requirements make sense or not before they ever pass them on to the developer team to make them production grade. And so there's, again, a much wider audience of users that can take advantage of this tool. And we're starting to see a lot of excitement there for ways in which they can be used. But I think that idea of just opening it up, putting it into spec mode, it's a button that's right there in front of you, and then typing into a chat box and letting it do the rest makes it really, really simple to get up and started. And so as we think through this complicated user manual for Kiro, it reduces itself down to like 3 sentences. And I think that is another indication that we've got the right methodology here for thinking about how to approach users.
So, Ryan, I would love to see Kiro in action. I understand you have a brief demo that you could share with us. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a really interesting demo where I use Kiro's spec-driven development methodology combined with an MCP server so that you can see how it works with an existing tool like Jira. So let me show that to you. So in this demo, what I've prepared here is an example where we can use Kiro's spec-driven development coupled with an existing MCP server that I've installed into my particular instance of a Jira connector. And so I'm putting in a prompt now. Instead of just typing in what I want, I'm asking Kiro to actually go to my Jira project, pull out a specific user story, assign it to me as the user, and then start building the requirements document from that. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to keep in sync with my third-party tools that I have. So my requirements writers and my project managers who are working in tools like Jira and creating user stories there are now not having to go to a second source of truth. Everything still resides in those same tools, and Kiro benefits from them simply by connecting to them through the MCP server. And it produces for me a requirements document here that has user stories, it has acceptance criteria, it has complex details, all from a very basic prompt. When I'm happy with that, I move on to the next phase, and it builds out the design document for me. And it builds out a whole detailed set of architecture documents, schema designs, testing strategies, interfaces for my APIs, all that different detail. And then when I'm happy with the design, I can move on then to the last piece, which is the actual tasks themselves. And so those tasks then get created and they get mapped back to individual requirements. And so you can see in the screen here that each task has a set of requirements that map back to it. And there's a start task button on top of it. So I can mark the start task button. That will kick Kiro off and it will start working on that particular task. And then it's going to actually mark the checkbox there and note that it's finished when it's done. And so not only do I have a task plan that I can follow, but I can also track my progress too. So these files again get checked into the repository. I can see how far along I am. I can take a vacation. I can go home for the weekend. I can come back on Monday and I can pick up right where I left off. And I don't have to rely on everything being loaded into that context window or remembering my chat history and remembering the things that I talked about and the order in which I talked about them and all of those different things. Everything is there in those stored documents and they get checked in directly into my project repository. And so they live with the source code.
I can see this seriously changing how developers approach their day-to-day work. This is super exciting. I'm more excited than ever now that I've seen this in action. It's tremendous. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan, do you have any resources that you recommend for folks to get started with Kiro?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Kiro application itself is available at kiro.dev, and we have a ton of information there on getting started. We have a couple of walkthrough guides for specific languages like TypeScript and Python. So we walk you through detailed steps of how to build an application. It showcases some of the spec-driven development techniques that we talked about. And then you can also check out the Kiro Discord server. There's a tremendous amount of activity there. We've got folks from the company that are responding to messages there. And we've got a really, really vibrant community there of people that are trying it out and using it in a lot of different ways and sharing the things that they're finding, the things they're building, and the excitement that they have. So if you really want to get fired up about Kiro, the Discord server is the place to be.
I love the ghosts. The little logo. Why is Kiro a ghost?
Yeah, the ghost logo has been hugely popular, surprisingly so. I have gotten asked a number of times for stickers and for t-shirts and for even little ghost plushies have been very popular. But the ghost comes from the idea behind spec-driven development. So when the team first thought it up, they came up with this idea of spec-driven development. Then they moved to Spectre, and then a Spectre essentially is a ghost. And so that's how they arrived at the icon that is now the logo for the product.
Fantastic. Does it have a name?
The ghost does not have a name. It's just the Kiro ghost. If we find a name, or maybe we'll give him a name just to increase the lore.
I kind of like Spec.
Yeah,
Spec Ghost. Specky.
I like that.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. If you're listening at home, Kiro.dev, check it out. Great place to get started. Looking forward to hearing all your use cases and stories in the comments. Leave a like. Want to hear about all your experiences with Kiro. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.